It's so good to be here with you all. If we maybe haven't had the chance to meet yet, my name is John. I have the privilege of being one of the pastors here, and I'm really glad that you are here. I'm glad that you decided to spend a portion of an absolutely gorgeous summer weekend in Chicago. I'm glad that you decided to spend a little time in here with us. I'm very grateful for it. And I hope you did. I hope you had a great summer or are having a great summer like Fabi was talking about. I know for me, I've had an awesome summer. I've done a little bit of travel, maybe not as much as Fabi. I've spent as much time outside as I possibly can because, as they say on HBO, winter is coming. But we're not going to talk about that today. But I think when I think back to the summer of 2024, I think the memory that I will hold most close in my heart has nothing to do with the sun or the beach. It didn't even take place outside, but I think my favorite memory of summer 2024 was going to the movies to see Inside Out 2 with my daughter. Now, there she is, yes. Now, as you can see, my daughter is quite young. She is 3 years old, which means that while she enjoyed the movie, she did not fully grasp the depth and nuance of all of the themes of Inside Out 2. I, on the other hand, let me tell you, as an adult, I had nothing short of a therapeutic, religious experience watching Inside Out 2. In fact, so much so that this is a picture of me at the end of the movie. I'm not kidding. I was undone, people. And as the credits rolled, so did my tears. Listen, if you are not familiar, Inside Out, it takes place inside of the mind and the body of a girl named Riley. And all of Riley's emotions in the movie are physicalized as these different emotion characters that live inside of her. And you get to watch Riley go through her life and watch as those emotion characters start to take the wheel or fade into the background, or more often than not, just get thrown into absolute chaos. The movie, what it does is it physically shows us the effect that Riley's inner emotional world has on her external world and vice versa. It's actually pretty genius. What Pixar has done is they have built a world with form and with rules and structure around something that for many of us can sometimes feel so chaotic and confusing, which is our emotional lives. And I think perhaps the reason that I had such a strong emotional reaction, specifically to the second movie, is because in it, you are watching Riley as a young teenager learn how to cope with and interact with and regulate and respond to her emotions. And so as I am watching this, cartoon teenager have a panic attack, I am sobbing. Because I remember what it was like to be 13 years old and struggle to make sense of all of the emotions that I was feeling. Heck, forget 13. I know what it's like to be 33 and struggle to make sense of some of the things that I'm feeling sometimes. I don't know about you, but for me, I grew up in a home where we did not really talk about our emotions. In fact, I would go as far as to say we didn't even really feel them. And it wasn't because we didn't have them, but the sort of implicit example that was set in my very Scandinavian family is that we keep our emotions in control, underneath the surface. And in addition to that, I also happened to grow up in a church tradition that was also pretty devoid of emotion. I know that's not the case for everyone, but for me, growing up, the majority of the teaching that I received, it was primarily logic-driven. It was very academic, and usually church leaders presented themselves as quite stoic and unmoving and sometimes even unfeeling at times. In fact, I remember there was a phrase that would often get thrown around the faith community I grew up in, that faith does not equal feelings. And the idea expressed there is that true faith is not about feeling God, but it's about knowing and trusting God even beyond your feelings. And while I believe that message was well-intentioned, and actually I believe there's some wisdom and truth in it, I think what it did for me and for many others is it sort of led us on this path of divorcing our spiritual lives from our emotional lives. this sort of inherent belief that our emotions and our feelings had no place in the church or in our faith. And so for me, that church background and that familial background led me well into my adult years to have what I would call an ignorance of, and even at times an aversion to, emotion or feelings. That's how I enter into this conversation. We're in a series right now called Making Sense of Me. And in it, what we're doing is we're looking to God to help us hopefully gain a deeper understanding of some of the parts of us that sometimes can leave us a little confused or bewildered or frustrated. And something we say all the time around here is that we believe that mental health is spiritual health. Emotional health is spiritual health. Physical health is spiritual health. And the idea here is that as you are investing in becoming more mentally or emotionally or relationally healthy, you are simultaneously growing more spiritually healthy, because in that process, you are learning how to care for and what we would call steward the life and the mind and the body that God gave you. It's all connected. And if you were here last week, we talked about making sense of our thoughts. And I started with a really simple question. And the question was, what do you think about your thoughts? And so today, as we venture to talk about our emotions a little bit, I wanted to start with another question. And the question is this: how do you feel about your feelings? Like, when you hear that we are going to talk about emotions in church today, what emotions do you feel about that? When you think about your feelings, do you feel excited? Or maybe do you feel scared? Or maybe even do you feel a little numb? Do you actually maybe have conflicted feelings about your feelings, because maybe you have categorized your emotions into two categories: good emotions and bad emotions? Are you maybe feeling confused at why we're talking about this in church? Are you feeling nervous that we're talking about it in church? Just in general, if you were honest, how do you feel about your feelings? With that in mind, what I want us to do today is just take a few minutes to examine a few different ways that I've seen that people, specifically followers of Jesus on the whole, approach the topic of emotions or feelings. And as we examine these different approaches, what I want us to do is I want us to look to the scriptures to see what God has to say, not only about those approaches to emotion, but look to what God has to say about the specific role that God designed for emotions to play, both in our lives, in our transformation. So I have one more question for you. Are you ready to ride an emotional roller coaster with me? Some of you are feeling nervous, and that's okay. That's okay. So, as I mentioned, in general, there are a few different ways that we see people approach the topic of emotions or feelings in their lives. And I already hinted at the first one a little bit in my own story. And this is those whose approach to emotions and feelings is that they ignore emotion. Yes? Now again, these are not people who do not feel or have emotions. These are folks who, like myself, because of their familial or cultural or spiritual upbringing, have been taught to, at best, mistrust their emotions, and at worst, completely ignore or deny them. Maybe you yourself grew up in a family or a church that did draw that dividing line between good and bad emotions. And so maybe you were taught that certain feelings like sadness or grief or anger were something to ignore or something to avoid, or maybe even they were treated as a sin for you to feel or express those things. And without casting any shame or shade on anyone's family or any other church, I do think that I need to say loud and clear that even a cursory glance at the scriptures will show us that ignoring our emotions is not a biblical approach. Period. End of story. Mostly because the Bible is actually filled with examples of faithful and faith-filled people expressing the full gambit of human emotions, not in spite of their faith, but actually in practice and expression of it. For example, you would be hard-pressed to read more than 2 chapters in the book of Psalms without finding expressions of joy and praise and expressions of grief and distress and anger. And those more, quote, negative emotions, we cannot consider them to be sinful in and of themselves. Because we also read in the Bible about how Jesus, who knew no sin, experienced the full spectrum of human emotions. Jesus wept. Jesus himself got angry and flipped over the tables in the temple. All of this to say, the faithful example that we see set out in the Bible, it is not one where we ignore our emotions or we separate them from our life of faith. But also, there is an approach that I would put on the other side of the spectrum. This is not where we ignore emotion, but these are those who potentially idolize emotion. This is where our emotions or our feelings become our North Star. This is where every decision that we make is purely based and guided and directed by whatever feeling or emotion we have in that exact moment. This is when our entire day or our entire week can be made or broken based on a temporary, fleeting feeling. Depends on when you catch us and how we're feeling. Now, I want to be really, really clear. People with this approach are not too emotional. That's often a label that we put on them. That's actually not the case. It's more that oftentimes they put a little bit too much weight and importance on their emotions in a given moment. And while the Bible would not teach us to ignore emotion, it also does not teach us to idolize emotion either. It doesn't teach us to centralize our emotions or to make them our own little God in our life. For example, in the book of Proverbs, which is a book of wisdom teaching us how to live, it has a lot to say, actually, about the foolishness of being too quickly driven by momentary emotions. The book of Jeremiah famously says that the heart is deceitful, meaning that you and I, we cannot fully comprehend and understand everything that is going on inside of us. Now, this doesn't mean that you can't trust any emotion you have ever, but it also doesn't mean that you should trust every emotion you have as a guiding light for your life. Okay, so pause here. We are seeing pretty clearly that the scriptures would not advocate for us ignoring emotion or idolizing emotion. And what I want us to do to help us understand a third way that God invites us into, I want us to examine one example that's found in Psalm 139, and we're actually going to put it on the screen for you. We're going to start right at the beginning in verse 1. It says this. It says, "You have searched me, Lord, and you what? You know me. You know when I sit down and when I rise. You perceive my thoughts from afar. You discern my going out and my lying down. You are familiar with what? With all my ways." So what's being pretty clearly communicated here in this passage is that God is even more aware of your internal world than you are. God actually knows the emotions that you are feeling before you can name them. And so it's actually impossible for us to separate our emotional lives from our spiritual lives because God knows the feeling before you do. And so again, we see here, it is fruitless, it is foolish for us to try and ignore our emotions in our lives with God. But this passage also challenges the opposite perspective. I'm going to skip down to verse 7, where it says, "Where can I go from your spirit? Where can I flee from your presence? If I go up to the heavens, you are there. If I make my bed in the depths, you are there. If I rise on the wings of the dawn, if I settle on the far side of the sea, even there your hand will guide me. Your right hand will hold me fast." Now watch this. What's being conveyed here in this section of the psalm is a contrast. And it's a contrast between the fleeting nature of circumstance, or in our case, emotion, and the consistent nature of God's presence. Meaning that seasons change. Circumstances change day to day. Our emotional state can change hour to hour, minute to minute. And so again, it would be foolish for us to make something that is so constantly changing, something that is so fickle, for us to make that our God, for us to center our lives on that. But what is constant, what we can rely and build our lives on, is the power and presence of God, regardless of the emotional state we might find ourselves in. So again, you're starting to see here in Psalm 139, just like the rest of the Bible, it is not teaching us to ignore emotion or idolize emotion, but it's actually where the psalmist lands at the end of the poem that begins to point us to not only the role that emotions are meant to play, but what our response to them should be. Look at this. It's all the way at the bottom. What are the first two words there? Search me, God, and know my heart. Test me and know my anxious thoughts. See if there is any offensive way in me, and lead me in the way everlasting. I do not believe the Bible would counsel us to ignore our emotions or idolize our emotions. I believe that the scriptures would counsel us to do what is being hinted at here, which is when emotions rise up in us, to investigate emotion, to become an investigator, to get spiritually curious, to actually, first of all, name the emotion that is within us, and then invite God to search it. Invite God to search within us, to search behind or underneath, or to search for the root cause of that emotion in our lives. The Bible would tell us that emotion is not a sin. The Bible would also tell us that emotion is not your savior. But I believe more often than not, what emotions are treated as through the scriptures, how God created emotions, is emotions are a signal. They're a signal that requires deeper investigation. Let me maybe try and illustrate it for you in a different way. So earlier this year, my wife Erin and I had the privilege of buying a new car. We have 2 kids now, which means we need to drive around a small house just to carry all of the stuff. And we're very, very blessed and lucky to be in a situation where we could buy our first larger family vehicle. We were really excited, got a great price for it, way to go. And here's what happened. Just 2 weeks into owning our brand new car, I was driving along one day, and this happened on my dashboard. It lit up like a Christmas tree. I was seeing lights pop up that I didn't even know existed in a car. It was like every single light on my dashboard just started going haywire. Now, let's imagine for a second, I'm driving along and I see all of these lights pop up on the dashboard of my brand new car. And imagine if I saw that and then I ignored it and kept driving like nothing was wrong. Just giving people thumbs up as I'm passing them. That would be foolish, right? That would be irresponsible. I would be a negligent car owner if I underemphasize the importance of a check engine light on my dashboard. Now also imagine this. Imagine if just one light popped up. Like imagine if anytime the gas light popped up in my car, I freaked out, pulled my car to the side of the road and abandoned it there. And just went and bought a new one. That would also be foolish, right? That would probably be overemphasizing the importance of a check engine light. But for those of you who own a car, when a check engine light pops up on your dashboard, what are you supposed to do? Investigate it. Get it checked. Get home and pop the hood. Check it out. Or if you're like me and you have no idea what's under there, take it to a mechanic. In other words, seek help. Go and see a professional. Ask someone who knows what they're doing a little bit more to check under the hood for you. In their book, Why Emotions Matter, John and Tristan Collins say this, and I love it. They say, your emotions are the dashboard of your soul. Just like a good car owner knows that a check engine light on the dashboard, it is just a signal that there is something going on underneath the hood that needs investigation. Those of us who are spiritually and emotionally healthy know that an emotion, it is a signal on your soul that there's something going on underneath the hood, that there's something that needs to be investigated. And just like a good car owner, you and I are good and faithful stewards of the life and bodies God has given us when those signals pop up, if we investigate them. if we investigate what's really going on underneath. This week, I had one of those days, I don't know if you ever have these days, where I was just grumpy. You ever have one of those days where you're just irritable? Like, I was angry at everything and everyone that came my way. If we had an interaction this Thursday, I apologize for whatever I said. And if I'm honest, for me, in the past, the way I've dealt with those feelings is I've tried to just like shove that anger down, which I don't know if you've ever tried to do it. Maybe you're stronger than me. Usually doesn't work for me. Usually what happens when I try and shove the anger down is it just comes out sideways. Comes out in the form of sarcasm, passive-aggressive comments to people I really care about, maybe some overeating late at night. That's just me. But because I'm trying to get a little bit better at this work, and because I believe my emotional health is my spiritual health, this week I said, okay, I'm going to try and investigate this anger. And lucky for me, at 2 o'clock, I had a therapy appointment. And so my therapist had the privilege of spending the large portion of our session together diving into that anger. We got curious about it. We asked questions. When did you start feeling that way? What do you think that's really about? What goes through your mind as you're having those feelings? And we investigated it together. And what I discovered is that underneath that anger was actually feelings of overwhelm. That really I was just too busy and I had overcommitted myself. And underneath those feelings of overwhelm, I discovered that I was scared. What was really going on is I was scared that I couldn't handle it all. And I was really scared that other people were going to see that I couldn't handle it all. And so that's part of why I was so impatient and short with other people. And I'm not perfect at this work. I'm still learning very much like many of you are. But I just wonder if this week you might be willing to try this. To actually try, when an emotion pops up, to try investigating it. Maybe this week, instead of allowing yourself to be driven for the rest of the day by the offense that you felt from someone's comment that they made to you, instead of putting it all on them, I wonder if instead you might take a moment to dive into that offense. To like ask, why did that bug me so much? What is it about what they said? What is that actually bringing up in me? I wonder if you could get curious about it. I wonder if instead of trying to ignore or distract yourself from the grief that you are carrying in this season, I wonder if this week you might just carve out a little space for that grief to exist. Maybe put like a crying appointment on your calendar to just let the tears fall in the presence of God or in the presence of a trusted friend. I wonder if when you feel sad this week, I wonder if instead of immediately turning to behaviors to help numb that sadness, I wonder if instead you could try searching that sadness. To try and understand what it's really about, what's underneath it. And maybe you'll discover that underneath that sadness is actually a deeper feeling, maybe of loneliness. And what you need is not another night of numbing out. What you need actually is to invest in finding and forming meaningful community and friendships in your life. Listen, I don't know what you're going to feel this week. And I don't know what's going on underneath all the things that you're going to feel. But God does. And what I do know is that when we actually do this, like when we see our emotions as a signal, and when we investigate them, and when we do this work with God, here's what happens more often than not. We discover that emotions are a surface invitation to a deeper transformation. Your emotions are a signal on the dashboard of your soul that something inside of your soul needs paying attention to. Something inside of you needs care. It needs space. It needs rest. It needs the wisdom and presence and power of God. And when we investigate our emotions, when we get curious about them, when we actually feel them through and examine them with God, what God does is God uses that process to grow us and transform us, not just emotionally, but spiritually. Here's the thing about emotions. They are not a barrier to your spiritual transformation. Emotions are actually a signal pointing you to where your soul needs a spiritual transformation. Emotions are a gift from God. An emotion is God reaching out his hand saying, we need to go deeper. We need to investigate this sadness together. We need to understand where this anger is coming from. We need to work on this bitterness and understand it together. Would you come with me to understand what's going on underneath? Would you follow the good shepherd into the pasture of your soul to discover the gift that God has underneath that emotion? That is the invitation we have. And as we, I hope, all seek to kind of enter into this practice of getting curious and investigating our emotions this week, I wanted to give you all a tool that I and a lot of people around here at Soul City have found really, really helpful in this work. It's called the feeling wheel. And this is something that I've used for a few years now. It's been around here. Many of you potentially use it. But what all it is it's a really simple and I think helpful framework to help you name more specifically the exact feeling that you are feeling. And today, actually, we've created these little cards for you, so you're going to be able to grab your own Soul City feeling wheel on your way. But sort of the way this works is you just kind of start. Usually, I start towards the center with some of the bigger, more general emotions, and I just try and place myself on there. Yeah, I'm feeling a little sad today. But actually, what's underneath that sadness is actually some grief. Grieving the loss, this season of life. And you just get curious, and you ask questions, and you dig underneath it, and you use this as your launching pad. This is a really helpful tool in a marriage or in a relationship, especially when you're navigating conflict, to be able to name how you're entering a conversation. Or maybe when you sit down to pray, just starting your prayer by kind of locating yourself on this wheel before God. God, this is where I'm at today. I brought this wheel out because we just printed these cards. I brought it out during my therapy appointment on Thursday, just as a launching point with my therapist into that investigation, which ultimately, and almost always for me, eventually leads to a deeper transformation. And so in just a minute, we're going to enter into an extended time of worship and prayer together as a church. But before we do that, I actually want to create some space for all of us to put this into practice right now. You're going to get an opportunity to name the emotions that you're feeling and to investigate them for a few minutes with God. And so here's what I'll invite you to do. As best you can, would you just kind of look up at this wheel and just as honestly as you can right now, in your mind, in your heart, in your spirit, where would you place yourself? And maybe you want to start at the center and work your way out. Maybe you find yourself in that angry corner. Maybe you find yourself annoyed today or abrasive or spiteful, enraged by something happened to you this week. Maybe you're actually over in the fear sector. And as you work your way out, it's actually you're just feeling insecure. Maybe you're feeling threatened in some way. And once you've kind of named where you're at, maybe you're in multiple places. Well, once you have a name for it, would you just take a second and close your eyes and just take 2 minutes to investigate that feeling with God? Sometimes a helpful question for me to ask when I'm doing this investigation is, when did I start feeling this way? What were the specific circumstances that led to this feeling popping up in me? Other times it's helpful for me to ask what's the feeling underneath the feeling? Like this week when I was feeling angry and irritable, what was underneath it was I was actually feeling overwhelmed and scared. Maybe you can even identify the thing underneath the thing. Or maybe you just need a minute right now just to feel the sadness. Or just to feel the joy. And like I said, you're gonna have an opportunity to grab one of these on your way out so you can continue this practice throughout the week. Because I genuinely believe as we do our part of naming and investigating the emotions that pop up in us, and when we bring them to God, God carefully and lovingly and wisely leads us into a deeper transformation, a deeper understanding of ourselves. And when we become more emotionally healthy, we become more spiritually healthy. When we become more emotionally healthy, we become more relationally healthy. By doing this work, I have become a better father. I have become a better husband. I am becoming a better pastor. And so this week, my invitation to you is not to solve your emotions, but to give them space. It is not to cure your emotions, but to just get curious about them. And so I want to invite you, if you're in this room and you're able, would you actually stand to your feet? Because like I mentioned, we're going to enter into a time of extended worship and prayer. And in just a second, our prayer team is actually going to come down here, and they're going to line the front of the stage. Traditionally, we have folks go to our prayer hall after our gatherings, but today we're bringing the prayer hall in here. And so if you are here today and you need prayer, maybe the emotion that you just found yourself having on the wheel, it's one that you want someone to pray over. You want someone to pray over that sadness or pray over that feeling of betrayal or hurt that you're carrying, whatever it is. When I kind of say amen and we start to worship, you can just form kind of two lines down these aisles, and our prayer team would love to pray with you. Even if the thing you need prayer for has nothing to do with this emotion exercise, maybe you just walked in here carrying something. Maybe you walked in here needing wisdom. Maybe you walked in here and you just know, I need someone to pray over this situation. Whatever it is today, our team wants to pray with you and for you. And so, like I said, we're going to worship together here in just 1 second, but real quick, I just want to pray over all of the emotions in the room. And so, God, we come to you full of emotion, full of every single kind. Some of us find ourselves all over that wheel today. And God, we just name where we're at. And we know that that's actually a good thing, because wherever we are at, you meet us there. Whatever emotion we find ourselves in, you are present. You are more present than that emotion is. You are more present than the anger. You are more present than the sadness. You are more present than the joy. God, thank you that you gave us our emotions as ultimately a gift inviting us into deeper transformation of ourselves and of our lives. And I pray for the people of Soul City that this week we would be a people who get curious, that we would get curious. We would not be judgmental of ourselves. We would not look down on ourselves when certain emotions pop up, that we would just get curious. And would we accept your invitation? Would we say yes to your invitation to follow you into deeper transformation? And so right now, God, we We give our emotions, whatever they are, we give them space, and we invite you into that space, knowing that you are going to use it for our good and for our growth. We love you. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.